There is a throne inside every human being, and someone is always sitting on it. The only question that matters, the question upon which your entire life will pivot, is who currently occupies that seat. For most people, the answer is uncomfortable, if they are honest enough to examine it. It is not them. It is the opinions of others, absorbed since childhood. It is the fear of failure, inherited from a culture that punishes risk more visibly than it punishes regret. It is old wounds, old rejections, old voices that were never invited to rule but somehow, through years of unchallenged occupation, seized control of the one territory that was always meant to be governed by you alone, your own mind. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying the wealthiest, most accomplished individuals of his era, searching for the single trait that separated them from everyone else who had access to similar circumstances. What he discovered again and again was not luck, not talent, not even intelligence in the way most people define it. It was self-mastery, the deliberate, disciplined ownership of one's own thoughts, emotions, and internal narrative. Every person he studied who achieved something extraordinary had, at some point, taken back the throne. They had evicted the squatters who had been ruling their internal kingdom by default, and installed themselves as the sole, deliberate authority over their own mind. This is perhaps the most overlooked truth about success. You cannot build an extraordinary external life while an unexamined, undisciplined mind continues to govern your internal one. The external world is simply an extension, a projection, a physical manifestation of the internal government that has been running silently in the background of your life, making decisions for you 1,000 times a day, long before you consciously notice you are even choosing. Consider, for a moment, exactly how much of your daily internal experience is currently ruled by forces other than your own deliberate choice. How many of your beliefs about what you deserve, what you are capable of, what is realistic to want, were installed by parents who themselves inherited those beliefs from their own parents, without any of them ever pausing to question whether those beliefs were actually true, or simply familiar? How many of your fears were planted by a single embarrassing moment in childhood, replayed so many times in your mind that it calcified into a permanent operating rule, still governing decisions you make decades later, in circumstances that bear no resemblance to the original wound? How much of your daily emotional weather is dictated not by your own considered judgment, but by the opinions of people whose only qualification for holding influence over your internal state is that they happen to speak loudly, or speak first, or speak with the false confidence that so often masquerades as authority? This is the first truth you must accept if you intend to reclaim the throne. Your mind, left unexamined, will not remain neutral territory waiting patiently for you to take control whenever you feel ready. It will be colonized, continuously, by whatever voices are loudest and most persistent in your environment, the culture around you, the people you spend the most time with, the media you consume, the old wounds you have never properly examined and released. An unclaimed mind does not stay empty. It simply becomes governed by default rather than by design, and default government, almost without exception, produces a life smaller and more fearful than the one you were actually capable of building. Here is the second truth, and it is the one most people resist most fiercely, because it removes the comfortable excuse that has protected them from the responsibility of change. No one is coming to hand you ownership of your own mind. This distinction matters more than almost anything else discussed in the entire philosophy of self-mastery, because most people never learn to separate the thoughts that are genuinely theirs from the thoughts that have simply taken up permanent residence without ever being examined. A thought that arrives in your mind is not automatically true simply because it arrived there. It is not automatically yours simply because you are the one experiencing it. Many of the thoughts running through your mind at this very moment were placed there by someone else: a parent's anxiety about money, a teacher's careless comment about your intelligence, a culture's narrow definition of what success is allowed to look like, and yet you have likely never paused to ask whether these thoughts actually deserve the authority they currently hold over your decisions. Owning your mind begins with this radical act of interrogation, stopping, deliberately, to examine a belief before allowing it to continue governing your behavior. Where did this belief come from? Whose voice does it actually belong to? Would I choose this belief today, consciously, if I were building my mental government from scratch, rather than simply inheriting whatever furniture happened to already be in the room when I arrived? This process is uncomfortable precisely because it requires you to question authorities you have never questioned before: parents, teachers, culture, even your own past self, who may have adopted beliefs in a moment of pain or confusion that no longer serve the person you are now becoming. Consider how differently you might operate if every fear currently governing your decisions were subjected to this interrogation. The fear of what people will think if you pursue an unconventional path. Whose voice is that, actually? Is it a carefully considered judgment you arrived at through your own reasoning, or is it simply an old, inherited anxiety about social rejection, installed so long ago. This is the work of owning your mind, not the elimination of every difficult thought, which is neither possible nor even desirable, but the deliberate, disciplined refusal to let unexamined thoughts continue ruling your behavior simply because they arrived first and have gone unchallenged the longest. This is precisely what Napoleon Hill meant when he wrote about the power of autosuggestion, not as some mystical practice detached from reality, but as the practical discipline of consciously choosing which beliefs are permitted to take root and multiply in your mind, rather than passively accepting whatever beliefs happen to arrive through the accident of your upbringing and environment. There is a third truth about owning your mind that deserves careful attention, because it explains why so many people who intellectually understand this principle still fail to actually practice it. Ownership of the mind is not a single decision made once and permanently secured. It is a moment-to-moment discipline, requiring continuous vigilance, because the forces that seek to colonize your internal territory do not surrender simply because you have identified them once. They return, disguised in new forms, testing whether your ownership was genuine or merely a temporary insight that faded once the initial inspiration wore off. But on the other side of this discipline exists something almost no external achievement can provide on its own: the profound, quiet authority of a person who has finally, deliberately, taken ownership of the one territory that was always meant to be theirs alone. This is the foundation upon which every other extraordinary achievement is eventually built, because a mind that has not yet been claimed cannot reliably build anything of lasting significance in the external world. Reclaim the throne. Not someday, not once circumstances feel easier, but today, in this exact moment, with the very next thought that arrives in your mind.